we at Inner Picture Stories are delighted to present the IPS t-shirts. T-shirts that change the world. Not only does each t-shirt design tell a story and carry a message of light waiting to be spread in your life and to those around you, but with each purchase, you also get to choose the cause you would like to support, where parts of your money will go. The causes that these shirts support vary from the environment to animals to those struggling with mental health issues, suicidal thoughts, loneliness, and diseases such as cancer. For further information about the IPS t-shirts and about the good causes you can support, simply go to innerpicturestories.com/shirt and take a look at these stunning t-shirts that can change the world. Welcome to the Inner Picture Stories podcast. My name is Jellis Vaas, your host and the founder of Inner Picture Stories, the educational platform on life. I hereby invite you to come on a journey with me. In each episode, we will dive into the life of an inspiring person seeking lessons of wisdom about life and the world we live in. Answers that you can take away and use in your own life. It's true that no one ever said life would be easy, but it's also true that no one ever said you had to do it alone. So get ready and let the journey begin.
I'm trying my darndest to make men's group look cool. To spin the narrative from having conversations is weak or, asking for support is weak to no, identifying a challenge in your life, finding a tool to help with that like a men's group, and then taking action on it is actually one of the most masculine, cool things you can do because you're actually doing something about it. That's a very positive, masculine, cool trait. That's a winner.
This is episode 024 with Sean Galla. A warm welcome, everyone, to another episode here on the IPS Podcast. This is your host, Jellis Vaas, speaking. Thank you for tuning in. This episode, in particular, the topic we'll be talking about, has been on my list of episodes I wanted to do for a long time now. Therefore, I'm also very excited to finally release it out into the world. Now, before I introduce our guest, Sean Galla, I want to make you aware of a few things about this episode. Since focusing the conversation on one gender can be taken personally by the opposite sex or even the same sex, I want to make sure you understand my intention and that of Sean in this episode. This episode is by no means meant to criticize or disregard the opposite sex. This episode is simply meant to bring a better understanding, both for men and women, of the difficulties men face, the mental health problems they struggle with, and how men can be there to support one another better. Along with that, this episode is also about how women can be there for men, and hopefully, through this episode, they can also understand men's struggles more clearly. Now, please take that into consideration when you listen to this episode. And if you can approach this interview with the intention of listening and understanding, this episode can be of true value to all of us. Men face some serious challenges that are often not talked about. And because we do not talk so much about this situation fails not alone men, but also women, as it often leads to confusion, misunderstandings, and unnecessary conflict among and between opposite sexes. I mean, if you would ask someone what problems men face more than women, a lot of people would go blank about that. But in truth, there is a long list of some profound struggles that men are dealing with today. And while you can read more about these struggles in the show notes, here are some of them to give you an idea. The majority of individuals experiencing homelessness are men. Most college dropouts are men. Most people in prison are men. Most drug addicts are men. More men die at work than women. More men fall victim to violence. And those who commit suicide are mostly men. Now, this is just the tip of the whole iceberg of problems men face that we do not talk so much about, right? Therefore, indeed, an episode here dedicated to talk about men. So, having said that, who is our guest here in this episode? And why is he someone who I believe is eminently worthy to talk about men? Our guest is someone with more than 10 years of experience building communities, leading men's circles, and organizing men's adventure retreat weekends. And he is also the founder of mensgroup.com, the leading online group for men. Sean Galla, our guest here in this interview, has some valid knowledge and insights to provide an altogether greater understanding about men for both men and women. In this episode, Sean talks more in depth on why he started holding men's circles and men's groups, and how he came to found mensgroup.com. Along with that, we also talk about men's health, masculinity, and how women and other men can better support men. To find all the resources mentioned by Sean, check out the show notes which are in the description of this episode, or go directly to innerpicturestories.com/podcast and search for Sean. With that, please enjoy this interview with the founder of mensgroup.com, Sean Galla. Sean, a warm welcome here to the IPS podcast. It's a real pleasure to have you on the show.
I'm so happy to be here, man. I support what you guys are doing so much. I love your mission, so I'm honored.
Well, thank you. So there are a few topics in this interview I'd like to touch upon. Obviously, the man group you have founded, mensgroup.com. But also, since you have over plus 10 years of experience holding men groups, and with that a great deal of knowledge about men, this would be also an incredible opportunity to talk about men and mental health, and as well masculinity, which I will clarify more soon in the interview, to provide an altogether better understanding in this episode to listeners about men. Now, I like to start this interview with the following question, Sean. I can imagine when you tell people at first that you hold men groups, a whole bunch of questions, but also misconceptions might pop up. What are some of the most often asked questions you get, but also what are some of the most often heard misconceptions you hear when you tell people you hold men groups?
That's such a great question, because I actually don't get a lot of questions about it. I get a lot of uncomfortable looks. Yeah, I get a lot of people. I mean, I might as well just say I'm an accountant or I work at a morgue or something, because a lot of people just don't want to talk about that stuff. They're afraid to talk about their own stuff, and so the fact that I do that for work, that kind of a lot of people shy away from it.
So you get no questions at all about this?
Yeah, rarely. Yeah.
Well, that is surprising, to be honest. Yeah. Why do you think most people are actually then afraid to ask any questions about it?
I think it's because it's the same reason why we choose distraction over, sitting with our own uncomfortable feelings. It's because we all have these uncomfortable things that we're walking around with, these feelings we've held on to from our lives, and here's somebody that specializes in that. It's the same reason why people shy away from or make fun of counseling certain people. And so I think it can just feel a little bit uncomfortable, a little bit scary to people.
Well, that does make actually sense. Okay, well, that's actually a more interesting answer than I thought, to be honest.
Yeah. I mean, certain people who are more comfortable with that parts of their own lives, they'll ask questions. They'll be like, oh, what kinds of guys are it, and what kinds of topics do you get into, and how do the meetings work? But in general, it's like, yeah, I might as well just say I'm an accountant, because usually the conversation just stops there. There's no follow-up questions if you say you're an accountant. There's no, are you an audit or taxation or what? It's just like done. So I'm kind of used to it now.
All right. So about 10 years ago, when you first started, what was your motivation, or what inspired you to start holding your first men's group? But also along with that question, because it's one thing to do something once, it's another thing to also make your career out of it. What was the drive or the passion to continue holding them?
Yeah, great question. Well, I was quite a high achieving person. I had achieved a lot, and I had met an incredible woman who was from Spain, and we decided to move to another country. We decided to move to Mexico so that I could learn how to surf, which was one of my dreams, and learn Spanish and these kinds of things, live a different life. And I had great friends down there, but nobody that I really connected with around personal development or around my business or around, I had friendships, but they only went so deep because of the language barrier. And so I found that there were some more important things that I was facing in my life, communication issues with my girlfriend, and issues with my business, and stuff going on in my family, and health issues. And I had nobody to talk to about those things. So I just threw a bunch of my friends into a Facebook group just to meet that need, some of my friends from back home. And I threw men and women into the group, and the men seemed really engaged. It seemed like all these guys from all different walks of life and all different types of guys, they too wanted to have those conversations, and felt like even though they were popular, successful people, they didn't have the opportunity to talk about some of life's more sensitive matters, you know? So I started this group, and it just kind of started to get really active, and more guys are engaging with it. And I was like, there's something here.
I'm actually curious to ask, but how did you yourself get introduced to men groups or men circles? Like, did someone introduce you to the concept, or did you hear about it, or did you read about it? Like, how did you stumble upon the concept, actually?
When I was younger, and I was beginning in my career as an entrepreneur, I started hanging out with other people who were interested in doing the same, and they were also quite focused on personal development as well. And so I met some friends through that, and they started organizing some informal men's groups, and they didn't even really call it that. It was like 5 or 6 of us just getting together to, support each other in business and life. And it was really impactful in all of our lives, and our well-being and our happiness and our level of success. And we really wanted to, we weren't even calling it a men's group at that point. It was just like, it felt good to have those conversations and get that support. And so when that ended, I realized there was a real void in my life, and I wanted that moving forward.
How long was that actually ago?
That was when I was like 19. So yeah, probably, you're making me date myself here, but probably like 15 years ago. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So yeah, quite a while actually ago though. Okay.
Yeah. And also I came from a hockey background. So like I played a pretty high level of hockey, and I loved the locker room and sitting around with the guys after a game. That's when they'd open up about their lives. And I felt a real void after my time in hockey ended with that. And nothing really replaced it until this men's group came along.
So interesting enough, that is actually a place exactly where men open up, right? In the locker room.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's one of the places where you can get to know the guys, and you've shared an activity, you've gone to battle with them. There's this bond, and so there's a little bit more security. They feel they're a little less scared of being ridiculed, which is the main reason why guys don't want to open up.
So, a question that I think both men and women listening would be curious about is, what do men, when they are in a safe space with people they feel they can trust and be open about, what do they talk about? Because often you'll hear when you'd ask men or women what men talk about amongst other men, the answer is often sports, cars, or girls. And, while these are topics we might talk about, it's a very incomplete picture of what we talk about and even what we want to talk about, right?
Yeah.
And this incomplete picture is very unhelpful for women to understand men better, but also for other men to know that it is okay to talk about more than only sports, cars, and girls. So I first would like to ask, if a woman would join, let's say, as an invisible spectator in a man's group, what do you think they would be surprised about to see, hear, and witness?
It's such a great question, man. I think first, before I get into what guys typically talk about, can I quickly speak to why they don't want to talk about this stuff very often?
Yeah, sure.
Because I feel like this is surprising to women. I've discussed it with my partner and a lot of my female friends, and they're always surprised to hear that guys are absolutely terrified of being ridiculed for looking weak, or coming off as gay, or being judged for things like that, being made fun of, being their whole lives, all they got was disapproval around expressing their feelings, showing vulnerability. And so there's like a deep ingrained fear there that makes guys not want to open up. But then the flip side of that is that, you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, look at psychology and community, being understood, having people to confide in is at the bottom of the pyramid. It's a foundation for a reason. It's because and guys really want to talk about this stuff. So what do they want to talk about? Honestly, it's just a lot of whatever that guys want to share their experience. They want to be able to say, I'm finding this situation difficult. I'm having this communication conflict with my wife. How do I manage it? I've got this family situation that's difficult. I've got this opportunity that came up. What should I do? Guys just want to be able to let the guard down and talk about these more sensitive matters of life. And the topics that come up are just so beautiful. You know, you have sometimes these big, like 300-pound biker bros with big tattoos and just like the most masculine guy you can imagine, you know? And he's there saying, hey, I realized that in my last few relationships, I just blame them, but I realized that I might not be that emotionally open and I don't know how to communicate my feelings, and maybe that's part of the problem. Can you guys talk through that with me, you know? Or my wife has just had 2 miscarriages and I have no idea how to support her. You know, like guys should walk around their lives carrying this stuff with them. They don't have anybody to talk to because they're afraid of being really ridiculed. And honestly, the biggest thing I've seen is they just want to talk about this stuff with somebody.
So I don't know if this might trigger some different answers, but if we would flip it the other way around, you know, let's say that there is a guy joining for the first time a men's group. What would, in general, of course, most guys be surprised about to witness and experience during such a session?
Yeah, if they come into a group, what they'd find is guys sharing very openly, saying, this is exactly what I'm going through. Here's my experience. Here's how I feel about it. And so, you know, there's a lot of, topics around relationships ending, communicating in relationships, how they can start to understand their feelings, how they can release some of their past trauma, like past baggage, so that they're triggered less, how they can parent better, how they can... Oh, boundaries is a big one. Guys are trying to be better with boundaries, you know, so that they're not pushovers and so that they're not being passive aggressive. Yeah, and just like a lot of, you know, guys don't have a lot of experience with feelings. They've never investigated them. They've never talked about them with anything. So there's a lot of sharing their emotional experiences and just talking through that with the guys. So, guys, I'm feeling sad and I don't know why. Or I feel anxious this week and I have no idea why. What do I do with that? You know, stuff like that.
In which way over the next sessions do you often see them change and grow, actually, when they would join a few of the men's group sessions?
I think in the first session, a lot of guys have never encountered anything like this. Like they almost didn't know it exists. You know, to come to a group and to find a wide diversity of men from all different, you know, backgrounds and careers and races and sexualities, and yet here they are sharing similar challenges to what they have. They're kind of surprised, you know, and they like it. And after the first meeting, they typically always say, wow, like this is better than I thought I could find. But then over the next 2 meetings, you can see their guard come down and you can see them start to share more. So in the first meeting, they might say, you know, I'm going through a divorce and that's tough. You know, second meeting, they might go, yeah, I was really caught off guard and when my wife asked for a separation and I found it hurtful, you know. And then the third meeting, they might actually get into the real details, which is like, my wife had an affair, I had an emotional breakdown as a result. I'm not sure what to do, whether to, you know, keep living with her for the sake of my kids or whether to go my own way and be a single dad. That seems scary, you know. So slowly it happens quicker than you think, because I think that the only thing I'm good at, my gift is like getting people to open up. And then when you come into a room full of guys and they're all sharing that stuff, it's a lot easier to let your guard down. But typically it takes 2 or 3 meetings.
All right. So talking about making people feel safe, one of the most crucial parts for someone to open up is, you know, to be able to make them feel safe. And as you pointed out, I could totally imagine that you must be great at being able to create such a space after so many years. For listeners who would also like to have more real talk with their partner, male friends, or any guys listening who would like to have this real talk more with their friends, what are some of the main ingredients to create such a safe place when you do a men's group? In other words, what are some tools, techniques, and ways to help men feel more at ease to have more real talk?
So I must make a disclaimer, okay? Intimate friendships and these kinds of intimate conversations, and I'm going to use the word intimate not in like a sexual capacity or romantic capacity, but like in a feeling of closeness, right? Not everybody wants to go there, because a lot of people had, through their childhood and through growing up and through heartbreaks and stuff, they've associated intimacy with pain. There's like fear there, and
That's
it's hardwired in there, you know? And so a lot of people don't want to go, or they're scared to go there, and they won't go there. And so if you are trying to build intimacy with somebody who's showing signs that, or, and build vulnerability and have those kinds of conversations, and you see somebody isn't willing to go there, it's kind of like dating. It's like, a lot of people won't want to go there. And that's not about you. It's not about you or how you're communicating. So just know that this isn't for everybody. But if you're in a scenario like a men's group, or if you're with a group of guy friends who do want to go there, or with your partner who's expressed they do want to go there, then there's a couple key points that I rely upon to build openness. Mm-hmm. The first one is leading with the traits that you want them to see. So when I start a men's group, for example, especially in a brand new group where all the guys are new and they don't know each other yet, I get them to give intros, right? I will give my intro first, and I will share my most humiliating, embarrassing, sensitive moments in that intro. I'll say, these are the reasons why I started a men's group. I was going through a breakup that was really humiliating. I went through business bankruptcy that was really humiliating. I've been cheated on 4 times. And then hearing me share my stuff and be vulnerable gives other guys permission to do the same. I would do this in another as well, in in-person men's groups, which I used to run more of. I would make sure that I know the guy who has the most sensitive issue, who was brave enough to go first, and I'd make him go first. Because after that, everybody else will share. Factor number 1 is lead with vulnerability, lead with openness, Number 2, confidentiality. Like, people need these things to be private, That's the reason why guys will open up in the locker room, because there's kind of an unwritten rule that stuff won't leave the locker room. You have to wade into that stuff as well. Like, there's a pace to building a healthy relationship in depth and vulnerability, right? Because there is a bit of risk with regards to opening yourself up to the wrong people. They can use it against you. They can emotionally manipulate you. In a business context, they can use that, personal information against you. And so there is a natural pacing to going deep over time. Friendships, good friendships and good romantic relationships, there should be some pace to it, and it can actually be a bit of a flag if somebody wants to just dump everything on you right away. So number 3 is pace. Lead into it, build the relationship, lead into it slowly. And then I think it's not trying to fix, this is a classic thing for men, it's not trying to fix people's situations. So if somebody does open up and share with you, it's like validate their emotional experience. That's usually what people want. They just want to feel understood. They just want you to relate to them. They don't really, most of the times, they don't want you to fix their problem unless they ask for it, especially in that male-female dynamic. So that's how I do it. I'm curious to know if you have any others, or if you've heard of any other good ones.
Well, I could just look at myself on when I open up, and it's mostly when I really feel that they're actually wanting to listen and understand me. Because many times people ask, how are you? But it never really feels like they really want to know. And then I don't open up about anything personal or anything that I really want to talk about. So when someone really tells me, like, really, how are you doing? And just listens and replies with good questions and listens again and tries to understand, that's when I really open up. And I mean, maybe this probably applies for both men and women, right? But it's still good to know that it does work on men as well.
Yes, it does. Yeah. Despite what most people would think.
Yeah.
A lot of men do want to go there and will open up if you approach it the right way.
Exactly.
You just actually reminded me of a 5th point, which would be asking good questions. So if you say, hey, what's going on in your life right now? And the guy says, I don't know, relationship stuff, go tell me more about that. Or, you can mirror them and repeat the last 3 words of what they said. You're fighting with your girlfriend? Just like keep asking why questions to get deeper. Like, it's a lot of men, because we're not used to sharing this way, we kind of need it pulled out of us a little bit. So
exactly right.
Yeah. So, ask follow-up questions is a good way to get a guy to open up as well.
So I like to switch gears and take a minute to talk about masculinity and ask you a few questions about this topic. Now, there are so many confusing messages being sent out these days to young men about masculinity, about toxic masculinity, what it means to be a real man. It has become very puzzling and hard for men to understand how they should act and behave in society. According to some sociologists and other experts, more men are experiencing a crisis of identity where they are struggling with the professional and personal demands placed on them in society. Have you also noticed in the man groups you've held a male identity crisis?
Yeah, it's a great question. And
It's not an easy question, by the way. It's
no, it's a very good question, and it's one that needs to get talked about. Yeah, and you worded it really well. The short answer is yes. Lots. Well, one of the primary reasons that people join men's group, at least these men's groups, and we have men's groups in Europe, and we have guys in, India and China and South America and North America and all over the place, South Africa, across the board. One of the top reasons why they join a men's group is because they feel that they don't have healthy male role models, and they're caught in between all these discussions around toxic masculinity and the Me Too movement and all this stuff, and they don't know what it means to be a healthy masculine man. And they want to access healthy male role models. They want to better understand how to show up in the world as a healthy, high-functioning man. So, yeah, I do feel like a lot of guys are wrestling with that question. For a lot of guys, I wouldn't necessarily say it's a crisis, but it's something that they are looking for, as to be around other men and to feel good about themselves being a man.
All right, so let's dig a little bit deeper in this. So This word toxic masculinity, it has gained over the last years more and more attention. Now, to me personally, toxic masculinity doesn't exist. There are simply toxic people in the world, in both genders, men and women. Like masculinity in its own isn't per se destructive, right? It's, bad men don't become good when they stop being men. They become good when they stop being bad, right?
Yeah.
However, I like to hear from you, Sean. What do you feel many people misunderstand about masculinity or toxic masculinity? Or just in general, what are your personal thoughts around these topics?
And I don't know if this is going to be a popular opinion or not, but what I've seen in the men that join our groups, and some of them are trying to, rid themselves of toxic behaviors, things that would be considered toxic, and I would probably consider toxic, is that, it's not this thing that's out there, toxic masculinity. It's just unhappy people do unhappy things, And so good on these men that are coming to men's groups, recognizing that they're doing these toxic things because of how they feel about themselves, about their life, because of some of the things that happened to them when they were younger. And so I think about it, I try my best to think about it on an individual basis. Because whether looking at the Me Too movement, some of the stories that were shared there needed to be brought to light, and toxic masculinity is, a thing that needed to come up. But a lot of the stories I've heard, I'm like, that sounds like a person who just is really hurting. Like, for you to do some of these horrible things that men do, or that people do in general. And side note, I've had some women do some horrible, I've been cheated on in 5 different relationships, right? So it's like, again, the same thing applies there. I could blanket that with some generalized statement that all women are X because, of that. But really, when I look back, those people were just in transitionary points in their lives, and they were really hurting. And so that's how I think about the toxic masculinity stuff, is it's an individual basis, How I think about masculinity in general, I like myself. And so I like my traits that come with that, with this meat suit that happens to be male. It's like, I like that I have a bit of a deeper voice. I like that I have broad shoulders. I like that I'm strong. And I like that in hockey, I used to hit things and my body's good for that. I like that there's a bit of emphasis on me being the provider in my relationship, although it doesn't always have to be that way. I like doing that. I like being the initiator. And so for me, masculinity is just the experience of being myself. I don't know any other way. And beyond that, I don't really think about masculinity too much. What do you think about that?
Well, I think actually that's a great answer. And like I said, right, I don't think there's per se anything bad with masculinity or toxic masculinity or that. It's just, some people are just toxic or in a bad place, like you pointed out, right?
Yeah.
And that's most of the time the reason why they might be doing something wrong. But then we put a word on it like toxic masculinity. But the traits of masculinity aren't per se toxic, right? It's just the people themselves might be in a very bad place. And also, as you said, there's equal amount of women who have definitely hurt men, very bad. And so, it's just...
There's this dynamic definitely of like... Oh, sorry, we cut out there. There was a bit of a lag. Continue.
Oh no, go on. I was actually finished there.
Oh, yeah. I was just going to say, of course, there's this dynamic of men having positions of privilege and power. The patriarchy, men being physically more bigger, so we're more in the dating hierarchy. We're more the predators. But like on an individual basis, it's like that construction worker who's whistling at that girl across the street, or some guy who's being creepy to a woman, or some guy who's abusing his power to do sexual things. It's like, how unhappy must that guy be?
Exactly.
What did he have modeled to him growing up that made him think that this is okay? Like though that I get curious, about people. So that's usually where I take it.
Yeah, and most men don't even agree on that behavior either.
No, definitely not.
So the following question, I was at first a little bit hesitant to ask. However, I'm going to ask it. And the reason why is simply because it is something that you do often hear women say. And I'd just like to know your insights and your thoughts on this. So, where are all the real men? Or where have all the good men gone? You do hear this often from women. Does this sentence, where have all the real men gone, or where have all the good men gone, trigger anything in you, Sean, from all the years working with men that you like to share?
Yeah, great question. I think where have all the real men gone? I mean, men said the same thing. It's like, where are all the nice, sweet women?
Yeah.
Look, I think my experience in dating, and I've dated a lot, and I've been in a lot of relationships trying to find somebody who's a good fit for me. I'm a unique guy, so that took some time. And I think that the reality is similar to the conversation we had earlier about how, when building more intimate friendships with men, or more vulnerable conversations with your partner or whatever, it's like the reality is that most people are avoiding themselves and some of the uncomfortable feelings in themselves. We live in this age where society is pushing us towards distraction, and especially if you live in a city, it's like you can distract yourself every moment of every day between your phone, between movies, between social movements, between this and that and that, and so lots of people just aren't addressing the uncomfortable feelings they have about themselves. Low self-worth, anxiety, anger for things that happen to them. And so I think that because of that, and because of how a lot of people had mediocre parents, it's like people have a lot of baggage around relationships. Yeah, there are a lot of guys who do unhealthy, toxic things, right? So, which can lead women to say, we're all the good men. But also, there's a lot of women who will say we're all the good men, but then their own baggage drives them to choose shitty men.
Yeah.
I've seen that a lot. Our own model of intimacy that we got from our parents we'll often choose stuff that replicates that. I'm a good example of that. I got a lot of disapproval from my father. He was kind of avoidant emotionally. So for the first 10 years of my dating, I chose women that were avoidant and somewhat disapproving. And that cycle repeated, and I was pretty miserable. And I was saying the same thing. We're all the good women. In reality, my emotional the emotions, the feelings that I had about myself and about my place in the world, and my personal my romantic relationships were dictating the results.
Like you said, there's probably a reason why you're not attracting the real man that you're looking for. So it's kind of about looking internally at yourself, and that's where everything starts.
Yeah, and also just being honest about how how your own baggage is influencing that. I can quickly use myself as an example. So I wanted to be with the hottest women possible, right? I wanted to be with women who had achieved things. I wanted to be with women who had there were certain archetypes, yoga teachers or models or whatever. and that sounds very immature, but it was all being driven by my low self-worth, by the pattern that I had with growing up from my father, which was disapproval. I felt disapproving of myself. And so these were trophies that I could cling on to, achievements that I could grab that would, at least I would think, make me feel good about myself, right? So the way out of that for me was actually getting clear on, okay, that's what my mind is trying to drive me towards, but what actually makes me happy in relationship? And it was a woman who's sweet, a woman who communicates a lot, like almost over communicates, a woman who's very affectionate, a woman who's reasonable. I find so many people are unreasonable because their emotions get in the way. This woman, the woman I'm with now, is reasonable. And when I outline those things of what I need versus what my baggage is driving me to, they were very different things. I started looking for this new model, this new model's the wrong word, but this new type of person. And then that's when I met my partner. And now I'm in the most fulfilling relationship with an incredible woman.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
So let's move to the last part here of this interview, Sean, where I'd like to ask you a few questions about men and mental health.
Yeah.
There is a great number of very serious issues men face more than women. Some of these are most people in prison are men, most student dropouts are men, most homeless people are men, most people who commit suicide are men, and most drug addicts are men. Now, these are some very big problems, but they are in general, more known amongst people. They certainly aren't talked about enough, but they are being brought to light more and more slowly, of course. Now, from all the events you've held, are there any other issues quite a few men struggle with that we aren't talking enough about?
Yeah, it's a good question. And to be clear, like those stats are even worse than you make them sound. Like when you say most suicides are men, it's actually like 80% are men. Most incarcerations are men. It's actually like 98%. Stuff like that. Homeless. I think it's 70, 80%. So it's something worth talking about, right? It's an issue. And I think what I've seen in relationship to that is that there are a lot of other issues that men face, and women face a ton of issues as well. Nobody gets to escape adversity in life, But the biggest thing that I'd like to share that I've seen about that is that I've seen how isolation drives people to do unhealthy things. So I'd say that what's driving a lot of those horrific stats are this epidemic of loneliness that men feel. This lack of confidence that men have. Because, all the research shows that isolation just is terribly for you mentally, terribly for you physically. It's worse for you than chain smoking. There's been all these studies done that affect your hormones and your mental well-being. And so, if you're walking through life and you have these challenging situations that we all face and you have nobody to talk to about them, it's very easy for that to sort of spiral into a lot of self-pressure and a lot of anxiety and a lot of overwhelm. And then if you don't have the right outlets or support pillars there, it's easy for that then to cascade into escape activities like drug use, vices like porn, alcoholism, infidelity, and then in extreme cases, violent crimes or suicide. So we have a number of guys in our group who've been suicidal. We have a number of guys we have guys calling in from jail. We have guys who have hurt themselves. We have guys who, have been in institutions. Most of our guys are not like that, but we have seen those guys, and there's always an element of they just had nobody to talk to, and that's why they ended up where they did.
Yeah. I actually worked for the suicide line for a bit, and loneliness is the biggest factor, actually, why people start to have suicidal thoughts. Every time almost that was the word that person dropped. So it is huge. Those research that you mentioned, read them as well. It's crazy. It's so crazy what loneliness does to a person, and shows really well that we are not, we shouldn't live alone. It's not good for us.
No, and I'm curious to see how those stats continue, because a lot of these social movements that have come out lately have been focused towards men, and they should be, because there's a bunch of horrible men out there doing horrible things. But that's creating an environment where a lot of other, good men who might be white or might be other colors, who might be of a certain age range or not, but they feel like even more now than ever, they can't share their personal experiences. Like it's almost amplifying this fear of ridicule or fear of being judged or fear of being ostracized from the tribe or whatever, So I expect, unfortunately, that these things are going to continue to get worse unless we start talking about this issue more.
Exactly.
You agree?
I 100% agree with that. Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing your experience as a suicide hotline person, because that's really validating to hear.
Yeah. Thanks. Thank you. So, even when things are horrible, like I already said, if you often ask guys, how they're doing, they will just say like, I'm fine, everything is good.
Yeah.
And most guys will say this without going further or deeper out of a fear of being seen as weak, or another reason is because men often aren't encouraged, like you said, to talk about their feelings from a young age, so never really develop this muscle.
Yeah.
I know this could be a rather big question, but how can men, women, and we all as a society help reduce the stigma around mental health for men? How can we help men start feeling more okay to share their feelings and reach out to help when things are not okay?
That's a difficult question to answer. I think obviously, a social movement, like bring more awareness to it would help for sure. I think what holds a lot of guys back from talking about this stuff is this perception that if you talk about these things, then that means you're weak or it means you're gay or whatever. They're afraid of being labeled and ridiculed, especially from women. Actually, they want to look especially they want to look strongest in front of women or their potential romantic partners. Now I'm trying my hardest to make. I think we need more people what you're doing and what I'm doing, where we're trying to make these conversations about mental health more approachable. I'm trying my darndest to make men's group look cool, to make men's group look to spin the narrative from having conversations is weak or asking for support is weak to like no, identifying a challenge in your life, finding a tool to help with that like a men's group, and then taking action on it is actually one of the most masculine, cool things you can do because you're actually doing something about it. Like that's a very positive, masculine, cool trait. That's a winner, So it's like changing that narrative that's been instilled in us for 50 years since it started getting propagated, and especially in North America is how I'm going about it. And yeah, what are your thoughts? Because from a bigger perspective, I don't know the answer. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing. That's why I'm dedicating myself to men's groups, because I see the social sort of pop culture is going the opposite way.
Well, actually, the answer that you gave to talk more about it, and actually, because this was such a good answer that you gave, making it look cool, that's really important, and it will help to motivate men to actually want to talk more about this by doing sort of a rebranding around talking about emotions. And that's exactly what you're doing really well, and I'm really, really happy that you're doing this, because you're doing it really good, actually. So that would also be my answer and my approach, actually, to tackle this, and you're doing it. So good on you. That's just awesome, actually.
Oh, thanks, man. That's nice to hear. I'm just operating here in my little office by myself with a small team, and so I don't know how people are perceiving what I'm doing. So it's good to hear that it's being interpreted in the way that I'd like it to. It seems to be with how many guys we have signing up. Another thing is that a lot of men's groups out there that I noticed is that the large majority of them presented themselves in really unapproachable, kooky ways that kind of like only reinforce the narrative that the stigma around men's groups, that it's for losers or that it's for, weak men or whatever, There's a lot of like spiritual, men dressed up in costumes or chanting with talking sticks or getting naked in the woods. And that stuff's cool if that's what you're into. But it's like, for most men, that's terribly unapproachable. It's just furthering the stigma that like, a men's group is not for them, that it's for weird dudes. So that's part of the reason why I created this as well. And I think we need more of that, just more average guys like myself kind of trying to spread the good word.
Yeah, so that's why I actually, because when I was researching for someone to talk about this, it was actually quite difficult for me to find someone, who was able to talk more down to earth about this topic. Yeah. And then I stumbled upon you, and I was like, that's the guy.
Wow, great.
Yeah, because you're right. I mean, like you said, like, if that's what you're into the more spiritual things and all that, that's great, of course. But it does scares me, actually. It does scare quite a lot of guys who just want to talk about down-to-earth things.
Yeah.
And so it's really great to see a men's group like yours just approaching it like this. Let's talk about things that we're dealing with right now.
Yeah, ultimately that's all that guys want to talk about is whatever is on their plate. So we don't have topics for each meeting. We don't like get into broad discussions like masculinity, like with the question you asked me before, because like I found that all guys have different stuff going on, and that's what they want to talk about. One guy's father might be dying, and he doesn't know how to he doesn't know how to sit with his feelings. Another guy, his wife might be having some trouble at work. Another guy's dog just died. Another guy is in an abusive relationship, and that's what they want to talk about. And I just couldn't find that anywhere else. Just like, hey, let's get together and have a chat. What's going on with you, man? Okay, let's talk about that.
So the next question here, I hope for that no one will take this the wrong way, but it's hard to learn from women about men, as it's hard for men to learn about women. The best teachers about men are men themselves, right? Having good male role models in your life is so powerful for any man to live a life of more balance, meaning, and happiness. Do you yourself have any role models, Sean, or are there any role models that you could highly recommend other men to check out?
Oh yeah, it's a great question, man. And again, that's why a lot of people come to men's group, because they don't have any, healthy male role models. And I think we can learn a lot from other types of people and people who are much different than us, whether that be in gender or sexuality or different places in life. But the example that I like to reflect back upon when thinking about can men get this stuff from women is, like, I was on another podcast with a good friend of mine who's an emotional coach. She's a brilliant woman. Her name's Rebecca, and she asked me, how can women support men? And I explained that men just need you to sit there and be present with them and let them, share their feelings. And she said, I'm a really emotionally intelligent woman. However, I would feel that uncomfortable. I've never known how to do that. Women usually don't. And so there is this aspect of, like, there's some biological programming there that's different in men and women, and how we show up and the mating dance and that kind of thing. And so, yeah, it can be really beneficial to just get around the guys and just talk about, what you're going through and hear how other guys think about it. Did that answer the question? Sorry, I feel like there's a part two
no,
of that.
Don't worry. It was a great answer, actually. But I'm going to repeat a part of the question again. Do you have any role models that you could recommend other men to check out, or any role models that you look up to?
I found that for me, I haven't yet fit a one-size-fits-all role model. So I haven't yet found one man, either that I know or don't know, that, like, checks all the boxes and, like, this is the guy who I want to model after. And so for me, I've had to piece together a number of different influences. So, like, for example, Rich Roll, he's a health authority who, like, at 45 years old, was a overweight lawyer, alcoholic, single father kind of thing, and then turned his life around, became the ultra marathon guy.
Yeah.
Like, I look to him for health, There's different people I look to around for advice around emotions. For example, Russell Brand, ironically, posts a lot of great videos now about personal development and the emotional experience. Jocko Willink, he's a great person. He's the definition of a bro, but, like, of a masculine bro, but, like, he can go there and talk about emotions and feelings and stuff like that, In my own life, I learned more from certain men in my own life. For example, one guy who's a bit of a public figure that I learned a lot from, his name's Ben Greenfield. He's a health guy, but he's also an entrepreneur, and I've modeled a lot after him. But then I have other friends that I model after. I have a friend who's in the construction trades, but he's a real sweetheart, and I learned a lot from him about, how to think about things. And so I've kind of had to piece together my own friends and then groups of role models. Now, because of this piecemeal approach, I found it to be nice to recommend some of the things that I found. So we do that on the mensgroup.com blog. So if you go to our blog, you'll see some of my favorite videos from Joe Rogan and, these different people. And there's lots of athletes and celebrities and successful men out there, like the Brad Pitts or the, Michael Phelpses that are or the, Lamar Odoms that are actively sharing their challenges, and they're great people to model after. So unfortunately, I don't really have a top three for you.
That's fine. And it's kind of the same with me, though. I don't have one, guy that I just have as a role model. It's several people. And Jocko Willink and Joe Rogan are definitely on that list there. So can highly recommend other guys to check them out if you haven't, because they're just awesome.
Yeah. Some other names to look at: Ryan Holiday.
Yeah.
His writing is great. Like The Obstacle's the Way. That stuff is great. Yeah, I've just pieced together, like, I'm more of an acute learner. So, like, when I identify that I have an issue in my life, then I'll just read that book and find my person in that realm, So that's how I approach it.
Sean, I just have two more questions left here for you. Maybe this also, triggers a few things up from the previous question. Do you have any books, videos, or podcast episodes that you could greatly recommend to any man wanting to become better men, or or to any female listeners to help them understand men better?
There's a lot of great stuff on YouTube, and I've found my favorite stuff and thrown it on our men's group blog, so definitely check that out. But there's a lot of great men's group or men's related podcasts like yours, the Everyman Project, EVRYMAN. Yeah, that's another men's group, technically a competitor of ours, but their podcast is great. Dan, the founder, has a lot of great guests on there, and they talk about a lot of men's issues. Man, I wish I was in front of my bookshelf right now so I can make specific recommendations. Actually, do you want me to do that?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead if you want.
Okay. Let me just look here. Okay, so Ryan Holiday, the Obstacle's the Way. That was a good one for me. One of his follow-up books called Stillness is the Key was incredible. Just talked about how to sit with yourself. The War of Art, that's a great book for actually getting over feeling paralyzed and stuck in different areas of your life. Emotional Intelligence 2.0, that's a great book for learning about emotional intelligence. The book Attached, I'm talking about relationship attachment, that changed relationships for me. I've read a lot of books around these kinds of stuff, and that book in particular, Attached, was just like understanding the attachment styles and where those come from and why they could be ruining relationships. That's a short read that's really, really impactful. The Eden Project, it's a book about Carl Jung's philosophies around relationships. That's great. No More Mr. Nice Guy by Robert Glover. Yeah. A book on how to set better boundaries and get clear on what you want. That one's great. I'm sure you've heard of that. Around career, the best book I've ever read is a tiny little book called Let Your Life Speak by Parker J. Palmer. It talks about how career chooses you. You don't choose it. And then there's a beautiful book called Becoming the Kind Father, which I was recommended by a friend, and it talks about how our father figures, there's many men who don't have healthy father figures, and so you kind of need to assemble your own father figure and talk to yourself like as though you were that father figure. That's been incredibly impactful for me.
Oh, wow.
That book. So those are the big ones that I recommend all the time in men's groups that, depending on the area of life that they are trying to, grow in, I'll often suggest those.
Mm. So if I could just, probably you know them as well, add two more books to that list. Way of the Superior Man. I don't know if you know it.
Yeah, David Data, for sure.
Exactly. That's also a good one. And then Way of the Peaceful Warrior, I think, from Dan Millen.
Cool. I haven't read that one.
Yeah, so I'm just now looking at myself some years ago on the books that really impacted me as a man, and those two definitely had a big effect, actually. So, yeah, and then the list that you shared there is a good list, actually, too. So that's great. Yeah, especially the last book really intrigued me. I don't know that one, actually.
Yeah, it's not a very popular book. It's written by a lawyer who just came across and taught this and wanted to share it with other men.
Love that. Love that. So, a last question for you, Sean. To the male listeners here who might be interested to join a men's group, but at the same time are still hesitant to go, are there any last words you would like to share with them?
I think most people are hesitant. I'd say 90% of the members are hesitant, and you should be, because it's a natural human response to feel hesitant to walk into a group of strangers, and there's some fear around, am I going to have to share? What's it going to be like? Am I going to like the guys? All that stuff. Totally normal. We've only had one or two guys in the history of mensgroup.com come into a group and go, nope, this isn't for me, because we're good at matchmaking. But this also happens in most men's groups. Most guys will walk in and go, oh, these are guys like me, and they have similar challenges to me. And even if they don't share in their first couple meetings, because it can be intimidating, even if they just listen in, they're surprised that it's like normal guys going through normal things, same kind of stuff they're going through. A lot of guys feel like they're the only ones that have their problem, when in reality, there's actually only so many problems. There's health, wealth, relationships, whatever, and it's the same things that come up again and again. So I would suggest just give it a try. A lot of these men's groups will give your money back if you're not happy. Just check it out. We don't force people to share. You could just show up and actively listen. I'm sure it's the same thing with a lot of groups out there. it's a tool. So just try it out, see if it works for you. It might not, and that's okay too. But you can't hurt by giving it a try.
So on that note, Sean, thank you so much for doing this interview and for the work you do. I mean, you are fundamentally making this world a better place for both men and women. Now, there's one final end question I have for you, Sean, that I ask all my guests here on the show and that I like to ask you too. But before I ask that question, where can people find and connect with you, Sean? And where can people learn more about Men's Group?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. I mean, it's just mensgroup.com. Again, I got that domain to make things as approachable as possible. So that's where you can find us, and that's where you can contact me through the contact page. And through there, you can access our community discussion area. You can see all the cool pieces of media on the blog. I'm making a real effort to find examples of leading men that are going through common challenges, celebrities, athletes, that kind of stuff, and finding media pieces on them. And really just, there's a lot of great resources on there that I think people could find useful. And then through there, you could just sign up for one of our online men's groups, give it a try. If you're not happy with it, I'm happy to send your money back. We don't want anybody in there who's not into it. So I suggest you just check out the site and you can message me through there.
So mensgroup.com, for everyone listening, that will be linked up in the show notes. So the final end question for you, Sean, and you can take your time with it. You can make it as long or as short as you want. But from everything that you've seen, experienced, lived, and learned in your life, what is the one thing you know to be true?
Man, I feel like I'm gonna cry even talking about this, but it's the internal journey is the journey. The emotions that we all deal with, the adversities we faced, the stuff that happened when we were younger that we didn't know how to process then, and so it's stuck in us. That's the stuff that drives a lot of the suffering in our lives. And the more we can, at least in my life and what I've observed in the guys in men's groups, it's the more that we can get into that stuff, shake some of it loose, understand it, so when it comes up, what's happening. You're not just automatically triggered into a response, whether that be anger or sadness or whatever. That's what will create more happiness and more success in life. And that's the journey that I would encourage. That's the real hero's journey, getting knocked down, finding tools, learning the lessons, building yourself back up and into an even better person. It's that internal journey that we're all facing. So I highly encourage you, if you're listening, to continue down that path.
Beautiful. Sean, once again, thank you so much for appearing here on the show. It's been a real pleasure.
Man, thank you so much for having me. It's so nice to connect with somebody who's doing this, who's leading men in this kind of a way. And I just really appreciate you making the time and please keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah, well, same to you. I could totally say the same to you. Thank you all for listening to another episode here on the IPS Podcast. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Sean Galla, the founder of mensgroup.com. To find all the resources mentioned and additional insightful info, check out the show notes located in the description of this episode, or go directly to innerpicturestories.com/podcast and search for Sean. With that, I wish you nothing but an incredible day, and I hope I can welcome you again soon on another journey, another episode here on the IPS Podcast. Until then, this is your host Jellis Vaz, signing off.